Hi, welcome to this video, which is all about understanding our anger and recognizing that however angry we feel, it's okay. It's okay to be angry. And we're going to talk about why anger isn't just a perfectly normal and understandable response to your experience, but why it's actually a really healthy emotion in general. And we're going to challenge some of those scripts about anger and consider why it gets a bad reputation. And we're going to think about how that bad reputation actually influences us, and it kind of causes us to sometimes suppress that anger, to keep things bottled up because we think we shouldn't express it. But actually, expressing anger is perfectly healthy. And so we're going to talk about some of the ways that might feel right for you to do that in this video. And anger isn't just a perfectly justified and understandable response to your experience, but it's also a really vital human emotion. We need anger as humans. It helps us do things. So we think about anger as being an activating emotion. So it's an emotion that makes us want to do something. It leads to a behaviour. And while sometimes society maybe associates that behaviour with aggression or conflict, it can actually be a really strong motivator in standing up for ourselves, in advocating for what we want or advocating for other people. And it can also be an activating response in the sense that it can trigger our fight response. So our anger can sometimes protect us as well. And anger is also a really big motivator in challenging injustice and channeling your anger into activism. And for me personally, it was definitely my anger that encouraged me to take this job. My anger around, the landscape of sexual violence and the challenges that people face. And actually, the more anxious part of me was quite worried about taking this job. But it was my anger that made me think, no, I want to do this and I want to be part of the change. So anger can have really positive effects on your life as well, even though those are not really talked about as much. And I guess because they're not talked about as much, even though anger, like we say, is a completely justified response to your experience, it can be heavily stigmatized and it can almost be shamed as well, definitely misunderstood. And that's partly because anger in general has a lot of stigma attached to it in society. And it's also quite a gendered emotion as well. So typically we might think that society tells us that women shouldn't really be angry, or people of certain ethnic backgrounds are considered to be more angry than others, or that men can be angry but they can't be sad. And in that sense, society has almost carved out these rules and scripts around emotions, and anger in particular, that sort of tell us, who's allowed to be angry, what they're allowed to be angry at, when they're allowed to be angry, and how they should be expressing that anger. And because of that, we can sometimes find that if our anger doesn't fit into one of those boxes, then we might be shamed for our anger. We might be told that we have anger management issues, or we need to learn to control ourselves. And we may even be punished for how we feel and how angry we feel and how we choose to express that. And that can be a really shaming experience, and it can be something that can be a real barrier to recovery. And actually that barrier, again, probably comes down to society's discomfort with anger. And perhaps because there is that discomfort around anger, we're not taught how to express it. we're actually encouraged to just minimize it, ignore it. But actually, in order to effectively express our anger and to manage our anger, like every other emotion, we first have to process it. We have to understand what that anger is about and how we should be navigating it. And so, in that sense, I think about some of the conversations that I have with people in therapy and some of the ways that we think about emotions. And I found it quite helpful to think about us as having multiple selves. So we have multiple parts of ourselves that are influenced by so many different things. And in that sense, we have an angry part of ourselves as well. And if we think of that angry self as almost being like a person in its own right, with its own identity, its own feelings, its own desires, then we need to give that angry self a voice and an outlet. So it can be really powerful to give that angry self a voice, to notice what it wants to say, how it wants to express itself, and generally get to understand it better. And that can also give you a little bit more sense of control and power over that voice as well. And I guess let it know that it does have more options than it possibly thinks it does, and it is allowed to express itself. And as well as figuring out what your anger wants to say, it might also be helpful to notice any patterns to your anger. So how does your anger present itself? So for some people, anger can be almost turned inwards. They can internalize that anger, which can link to self-blame, which is something that we've talked quite a bit about in some of our other videos. But actually, when we start to notice that we're placing that anger on ourselves, then it makes us more equipped to be able to challenge that and to maybe start to consider whether there are maybe other people and other things that actually deserve our anger, and we can maybe project some of that anger back to the people that deserve it. You might be somebody that tends to bottle up their anger. So you might find that your anger tends to kind of burst out of you with seemingly, no warning signs. But actually, as you start to notice those patterns, then you might be able to better identify some of the triggers to your anger. And actually, when we notice those triggers, we can start to recognize, okay, so what is it about that that's making me angry? What can I do about that? How can I express this anger in a way that feels more controlled? And it's also really common for us to misplace our anger, to project our anger onto other things than what we're really angry about. And an example of that is, I guess the saying is we take it out on those closest to us. And sometimes we can project our anger onto those people around us because it probably feels more tolerable and it feels safer to, channel your anger into those things. Why your partner hasn't washed the dishes, for example, then face some of the much bigger and perhaps some of the things that are more out of your control. And this is a really understandable response. But again, by becoming aware of these things, then you might be able to have these conversations with your partner or your loved one, and hopefully they can help support you with that anger and hopefully navigate it in a way that might result in less conflict. But essentially, however your anger presents itself, whatever it needs, whatever it wants to say, it is justified. But there might be times when your anger, it might feel a little bit scary, it might feel out of your control, and it might feel like it's really dominating your everyday. And so there are ways that hopefully we can help to navigate that anger. If reducing the anger is part of your goals, then we can certainly do that. If it's more about having more contained ways of expressing it, then we can do that too. But it is really important to say that the point of this video is not to eliminate that anger. It's not to suggest that you are not allowed to be angry, whether that's at the person who's done this to you, somebody who's blamed you, or generally just the society that we live in. That anger is perfectly justified and you're allowed to feel it. This video is purely around finding ways for you to express that anger in a way that may be more productive and more effective and safe, I guess. So that's definitely the main takeaway that I would want you to get from this video. And as we all feel and express anger differently, this isn't an exhaustive list of tips. There are probably many more things that you can think of, and feel free to leave those in the comments below. But we're just going to go through a few options that might be helpful for you in allowing that anger to speak up and have it heard, I guess. And one way to do this is to literally, verbally let it out. So you might want to go to a private space, whether that's in your room, in your car, your garden, wherever feels safe, and just scream. You might want to literally scream at the top of your voice. You might want to shout things, swear, whatever you feel like you need to get out. If it feels right for you to do that, be noisy, let that anger have its voice. And you may even have a close friend or a family member, a partner, and you might want to scream together if that feels right for you. But you may be more physical, so you may not really want to speak about your anger, but your body might want to kind of release the anger in some way. You might want to punch your pillow, maybe even boxing might work for you. You could even visit a rage room. That's a personal favourite of mine. Smashing things, throwing things. That might be a really great outlet for you. Or you might just want to do some exercise, go for a walk, a run. You might not be as destructive as me, and that's okay. It's certainly okay if you are as well. It's around providing a release. So whatever is going to give you that release, then that's got to be the right thing for you. And talking about the angry thoughts might help as well. You might want to really connect to what the angry thoughts are saying, what they're thinking. You might want to write them down as well and, maybe tear them up afterwards, scribble all over them. Some people like to draw their angry self. So imagine what this anger looks like, kind of give it a character. I suppose provide a creative outlet for their anger as well. But essentially, the idea of this video is to remind you that anger is healthy, it's justified, and you don't have to stop being angry. But I do hope that some of the tips that we've shared, they might just give you an idea of how you can express your anger in a way that hopefully means it's not overruling your life and it's not dominating any aspect of your recovery. And it would really be great to maybe understand what things help you to eliminate your anger. I've mentioned about leaving a comment. It might be really helpful to share any tips that you have with somebody else who's watching this video. And I also just want to end the video on, I suppose, a reflection that feelings of anger are incredibly common when we've experienced any form of injustice, abuse, discrimination. But actually simply being a part of the Enough community, simply watching this video, you're already taking action. You are already a part of the change that is hopefully aiming to change some aspect of the landscape around sexual violence. And in that sense, your anger is really doing good. And so you're already channeling your anger in a healthy way. This video is maybe just around finding some other ways to express it as well. So I hope you found it helpful, and I hope you can encourage your angry self to find its voice.